Today we're going to be looking at how to approach the poetry question. This is for the CIE IGCSE poetry, and this is Songs of Ourselves Volume 1 Part 4. This is for the 0475 or 0992 specification, and this is for Paper 1. So today this is just part 1 of a 2-part series, and we're going to be looking at how to approach the poetry question, how to plan an answer, and then in part 2 we'll look at how to write up an answer. So let's just recap this part of the paper. You've got about 45 minutes for this section of the exam. Do use your time wisely. Don't forget to read the poem, make notes on the poem, plan your answer, write up your answer, and then just give yourself some time to check. It's going to be much easier for you if you practice your method before you actually sit the exam. And today, as I said, we're going to go through how to approach this question, and then in the next lesson we'll look at how you write up your answer. So what should you focus on when you're looking at a poem? Now, all of these you will cover in your lessons. Your teacher will cover these when teaching you the anthology. But just a reminder, for when you go into your exam, you will be faced with a poem that you do know, but you must remember that you're being expected to comment on a range of different features. So you should be thinking about the content, what the poem is about, the themes, the tone, the message, the big ideas or the issues that are explored by the poet's intention. Think about language, structure and form. You should be talking about all three of those. They should make their way into your answer. And context, but only if it's relevant. So how are you supposed to answer this question? Now, all you need to do is just make sure that you know what skills are being assessed and where. So first of all, you've got your AO1 and AO2. So this is evidence that you've got a good understanding of the poem, and that's just what I've mentioned. Do you understand the themes? Do you understand the meaning and the message? Do you know who the speaker is, what their perspective is, what their voice is? Think about the tone and think about the point of view of the poet as well. And yes, sometimes context will help you with the feelings or the point of view of the poet and what they're trying to convey. Use of relevant quotations is very, very important. Making deeper meanings and inferences. So don't be afraid to interpret, but not only interpret a quotation or the meaning, but offer alternative interpretation. So this could mean X, Y, and Z. It could also mean, it could be suggested that. Think about the poet's intention, why they've written this poem, what they want you to understand, how they want you to feel. And again, context only if it's relevant. Please don't bolt on a piece of contextual or historical information. Only use it if it aids and supports what you're already talking about. AO3 is the ability to demonstrate a good understanding of how ideas, themes, a speaker is presented to you. The how is the method, the language, the structure, the form. Within that, you must also show that you know why they have been presented in this way. If free verse has been used as a form, why? How does free verse support the bigger issues? How does free verse support the message? Why has the poet chosen that particular form? And finally, AO4. AO4 is all about how you present your ideas. This is how it will look when you write up your ideas in an essay format. Should be relevant, should be coherent, and it should be clear that you are personally responding to the question. So here is just an overview of some of the different techniques and methods that you could comment on. You may want to pause the video here just to have a quick look. I've got a range of language, structure and form. And when you're thinking about any of these, you're always asking yourself, what is it that I see? Why has it been used? What is the effect? How does this particular device or method reinforce the message? How does it reinforce the themes? And if you can, always try and double up. For example, you may pick a quotation that is personification, but you may also notice that it's also a line that has enjambment. So you may decide to talk about 2 different techniques within one quotation. So let's have a look at the poem. And just to remind you that you will have a copy of the poem in front of you in the exam. So obviously by this point, when you sit the exam, you'll be very familiar with these poems. But it is a good idea just to keep practicing annotating from scratch, just seeing how much you recall of each different poem, just kind of practicing going through the annotation process, recalling the information in terms of what it's about, what the big ideas are, what the themes are, and which different methods have been used by the poet. So today we're going to be looking at this question. Explore the ways in which Shelley presents ideas about power in his poem Ozymandias. So let's go through the steps. So there are several different steps that I recommend that you go through, and it's probably a good idea to practice these steps and just go through these steps every single time you are approaching a question. So step one is just to read the question and underline the focus. So just think to yourself, okay, what am I looking for? What is my essay going to be about? What am I responding to? And in this question, it's how does Shelley present ideas about power? So you're going to be thinking about anything to do with power, the ideas in terms of what Shelley's trying to show you or comment on in terms of power. And exploring the ways, that's just the methods. So obviously you'll be picking out the methods and analysing those. Step two is make a note of what the poem is about. So this will just help to remind you of what to say when you start to pick out the techniques. There's no use in you merely going through and technique spotting and saying there's a simile here, there's a metaphor here, caesura has been used here. You have to tie it into something. You have to say why those techniques have been used, what they are reinforcing, what they're showing. So it's just a really good idea to just make some very, very quick notes around the poem. What are the themes? What issues are explored? What's the tone? What are the big ideas? And then just read back through the poem. So once you've just, glanced at it, obviously you'll remember the poem, you've recorded all the information to do with it, then you go back through and read it. And then you're highlighting quotations that you think you could use with regards to the question. So highlight quotations, think about the techniques, the methods that have been used, think about how the techniques show the focus in the question, how do they reinforce the focus in the question. So for this one, we're looking at anything that shows something to do with power. It may help you to then look at different sections of the poem. So think about if there are any changes and shifts. So can you divide the poem into sections of the different tones? Do we shift perspective? Is there a time shift? So it's also a good idea to think about that in terms of how the poem is structured. As you're going through, you should be aiming to be highlighting quotations that present you with a mixture of different devices and techniques. So a mixture of language, structure and form. And like I already said, do look out for ones that can be doubled up. Once you've done that, once you're happy, you understand the poem, you've got a range of quotations that you could use in your own answer, then you can make a brief plan. So think about the kind of points that you would want to make in response to the question. What is it that you're trying to prove with regards to this question? And then think about the quotations that you will use. And in today's session, I will be talking you through the quickest way to make a plan that not only is relevant, but it also ensures that you've got that coherence to your essay. Okay, so we've read the question, we've underlined the focus, and now we're going to be thinking of what the poem is about. So for you, you'll very, very quickly be jotting down next to the poem on a piece of paper everything that you can recall about the poem. And this is my example, okay? So you don't obviously have to write it in full sentences. I've tried to make it so that you will understand my thought process, but for you, you can just make brief notes, bullet points, spider diagrams, however you choose to do it. So I've just organised my notes in terms of what it's about, what the tone is, what the message is, the themes, and anything to do with form. I've included form here because form can sometimes be something that pupils forget. So maybe just to pull it to the front of your mind to think, right, I must comment on form, or I must identify something to do with the form. It's usually easiest to do it at this initial step. So I've got what it's about. So just on a basic level, just to remind me, the speaker recalls meeting a traveller from an ancient land who tells her about a statue in the desert. Now the statue has been destroyed and only parts of this are left. So that's kind of the crux of the poem. Different tones, so at times it's ironic and sometimes it's solemn, like sometimes that will shift. Then you think about the message or the big ideas. So ultimately this is a poem that warns about power. Shelley's telling us or giving us this idea that no power is permanent and forcing our attention towards this idea that great rulers and great kingdoms are not eternal or indestructible. We're also shown that art has the power to record and endure long after the subject of that art is gone. Some of the themes that are explored, the transience of power, art itself, and nature. And because I said I want to try and recall the form, I want to try and make sure that I don't forget to comment on that. Some of the things that I could mention, sonnet doesn't really fit the traditional Petrarchan or Shakespearean form, so I will maybe talk about how it subverts that. There's a break in rhyme that reflects the break in the statue, so rhyme is form as well. And you've got first person, and then you've got different voices that also come into the poem. So all of that now just kind of gives me something that I can start with in terms of now really going deeper into the poem and thinking about those methods and those quotations. So this is what I know. This is my box that I've just gone through. This is what I know about the poem. Now I have to think about, well, how do I know all of these things? How are they expressed to me by Shelley the poet? And this means looking for your evidence and your techniques. And my top tip for you is to use coloured highlighters. If you've got different coloured highlighters, it just helps you to focus. And so if you have one for language, one for structure, then you can think, okay, well, my language is green or yellow. I've got a lot of that colour, but I don't have much colour for structure. It just helps to keep you focused on talking about a range of them. You'll also see that I've decided to just separate my poem where I think that different things are being spoken about, or we've got a shift in terms of what is being described. Also helps you. You may decide, okay, I would like to have quotations from all the different sections rather than just maybe picking one section. So what we have here is I now have used this box to help me. I keep going back to it. So as I was doing this previously, I kept going back and thinking, okay, what am I looking for? What's relevant to the question in terms of power, but also what do I know about the poem? And I have used different coloured highlighters. So you can see I've gone for anything yellow is interesting word choice. I'm going to make a comment on the kind of vocabulary that's chosen and why. Imagery and language devices are purple, and anything to do with structure and form is green. And as you can see, and I can quickly see, I have a range of them. So I know that I'm probably not going to leave any of those out. When I'm picking my quotations, I can look at the different colours and think, okay, well, I've got quotations that only have purple in them. Let me have a look at a quotation that's also maybe got yellow and green, so I can address all elements of the mark scheme, get my language structure and my form in there. Okay, so once you've highlighted, you're also thinking about naming the devices, naming the technique. So what is it that you see, and also explaining. So what I've done is, as I've highlighted, I've just written down what it is that I'm highlighting. So where I've got imperative language, I've just made a little note. Where I've got enjambment or caesura, and you can see that I do have a range here of my annotations in terms of structure, language, and also form. Once you've got all the techniques, then you could just jot down a little note of what is it that you're going to say about them. Which ones can you analyse in depth? Which ones could you double up on techniques for? Which ones really link to the question? So you may decide, well, actually, I don't really know what I would say about personal pronouns. I know it's there. I don't know what I'd say about it. And I actually don't now think it's relevant to the question of power. So you could skip that one and just do notes for the ones that you do think you could use or that you do think are relevant to the question. And you can just see that I've done this. I've gone for all of the ones that I've annotated just so you can see what it would look like. So like I said, I've gone into detail here so you can understand my thought process. You could just do it in note forms. So you can see that I've just thought to myself, okay, what are the techniques or the devices? What do they show? How have they been used? So we'll just have a look at a couple that I've got over here. So I put here, there is enjambment here. Thought, well, what does it show? Why has enjambment been used here? Now, you may remember some discussions from your class or some annotations that you already have in your anthology, but if you don't remember, don't worry about it. You will, by the time you get to this exam, be very able to talk about techniques. So even if you can't remember exactly what you've discussed in lesson or you've done by yourself, then just have a look back at the poem and think, okay, why has enjambment or caesura or imagery been used at that point? And I've decided that enjambment shows how the legs themselves stretch across time. If we look down here, I've also had a look at language, the imperative. I think the imperative shows a little bit of arrogance, also maybe shows a transience of power because this person's arrogance wasn't strong enough to save the statue. But also it's a way of maybe preserving the personality. We do get a sense of the personality from the imperative. So I've just tried to jot down a few things in terms of my own interpretation and my analysis. So let's have a look at where we are. We've gone through all of these 4 steps, and now we're at the point where we can really go back to the question and think carefully, okay, what is my plan? You do need to have a plan. It's very, very important that you have some kind of order and structure to your ideas. Again, thinking back to that AO4, having coherence when you're writing out your ideas, and also thinking about how you're ordering your personal response. So you do need a plan. So what you do have is your notes on the poem, you've got the themes, you've got brief annotation of a range of techniques. So before you get to your plan, think about the main idea being expressed in the poem with regards to the question. So just go back to the question. It's about power. So you're being asked to think about how power is presented. So we'll just bring that back before we start to make a plan. So what is the main idea with regards to power that Shelley is trying to express in this poem? Once you've got that main idea or that big idea, then you can start to populate your different points from there, your different sections of your essay. Now, this main idea that you have, or this big idea, also can act as a thesis statement, which is what you believe, what you're trying to prove, and that can then be used in your introduction. So you can also think about using your notes to help you. So these are my notes from earlier, and I thought, okay, if I have a look at the message and the themes, and I look back at the question, what's the main idea that I think that Shelley is trying to get across? And if I do make a summary of that, I think that really Shelley's trying to show that power isn't permanent. So I've got my main idea, I've got my thesis statement. This is now what I'm going to prove. Once I've got my thesis statement, I now need to think about the different sections of my essay that are going to prove it, the different points that I am going to make. So you're going to think of the points that you can make that answer the question, but also support the main idea that you've stated. And then you're going to go back and find evidence. So you're not going to choose all of those different quotations that you've highlighted. You're not going to pick all of them. You're not going to have time. You're now going to start to be selective. So now you've got your thesis statement. You're thinking, right, what's the point that I'm going to make? Have a few different points in your essay. What's my evidence then going to be to back up those points? What does the evidence show? Hopefully you've already got your annotation, so you're helping yourself out there, saving a bit of time. How does it show it? And why has it been shown in this way? So do just check that you've covered all these either in the planning stage or when you're writing up your essay. So this is my plan, and as you can see, it's very, very short. Everything's in note form. My thesis statement is probably the closest that you've got to a full sentence. Power isn't permanent. How am I going to prove power isn't permanent? I'm going to talk about nature. Then I'm going to talk about the cruel leader that's presented the poem and tyranny and how that's presented. And then I'm going to talk about the power of art. Now these are going to be my points on my topic sentences. These will add to the different sections of my essay. So I'll start with my thesis statement in my introduction, and then I'm going to have 3 different sections. Once you've got these, then you can go back and choose the quotations that you want to use for each. Do aim for 2 to 3 quotations for each of these different sections, each of these different points, and then just number them. So you don't have to write out a brand new plan. You could if you wanted to. Depends how you choose to organise your ideas, but you could just have these scribbled down somewhere on your paper, on your poem, and think, right, okay, I'm going to talk about nature first of all. Now I'm going to have a look back at the poem that I've already highlighted and annotated. Which 2 or 3 quotations can I use in my answer to talk about nature? And I've done that right here. So you can see that my ideas, I've numbered them. So anything that I want to talk about in terms of nature is number 1. Anything that I want to talk about in terms of a cruel leader or tyranny is number 2. Anything to do with art is number 3. Okay? So I've got 2 1s, which means I've got 2 quotations for number 1, 2 2s, 2 quotations for my point number 2 or my section number 2, and 2 3s. You may decide that you can fit in a 3rd quotation at some point, maybe not in every single section, but you may decide, actually, I've got 3 quotations that I think I could use. Remember, a quotation does not have to be a full line. A quotation, it can just be 1 word as well. So sometimes you can kind of seamlessly include shorter quotations in your response as well. So that's the end of this session. So thank you very much for taking part. Hopefully that has helped you to understand how to approach the question, how to interpret the question, how to then use the poem to help you, and how to make a quick and easy plan.